Hey everybody, Eric here with Urban Story Studio. And today I want to do something a little bit different and take a break from sharing tips and tricks from actual projects and models and instead take a step back and share with you a little bit more about my thinking or my approach for how exactly it is that I design which tools and which process or which style to use for a particular set of deliverables. Okay, so for context a little bit, what I mean by deliverables is the final end product. So when you think about saying, I've got this design problem, I've got this design booklet, this package, this site, ultimately at the end of the day, when we think about what we do as designers, is that we take all this information and we sort of run it through, compress it, distill it, translate it into something visual that then gets communicated to your client or your audience. So when we talk about deliverables, the obvious ones are a site plan, section cuts, renderings, which are perspectives. They can be aerials or they can be orthos, but for the most part, they're perspective renderings. So that's kind of what I mean is how do we get from, hey, I've got a design problem to all the way down to the finish line saying, here's a sketch of a ground level view that I chose in this style. So let's just get right into it. So I've got this little, not sure which side it's on here, this little handy map for starting with what I call the input. So the input meaning these are the questions that I ask before I can make any decisions about what I'm really capable of. My job is to get curious and get as much information as I can so that I can make the best decision possible. So for example, the first thing, now this is often given to me. This is usually where we start the process. Hey, Eric, we've got this, we need this. Or hey, Eric, there's this project we want you to be a part of. So what I call the problem, which is what exactly it is that we're doing. For example, it can be more generic. We've got a concept for a plaza or we have an opportunity for a plaza and we need a concept design for it. Or how do we get the bus passengers, what do we do along this edge as they work their way from the bus station to the university? It's usually like a design problem, but it might be specific, meaning we've got this plaza already designed and we need two renderings, one aerial, one ground level to explain the concept. So again, this is kind of figuring out where are we in the process so that I can understand what is it are we actually trying to do here? What's the ask? What's the problem? So the next thing is, and again, I kind of started to ask some of these background questions, which is the context to the problem, meaning where are we in the design process? Is this a public, are we early where we're gathering input from the public? Is this initial concept where we're just throwing out big ideas? Or is this sort of towards the end where we're moving into visualization and we're putting together a final booklet? Who else is involved? Is this all internal? Are there consultants or are we moving information from the design team? What starting information do we have? For example, do we even have a 3D model? Or we need to build one from scratch in order to get a perspective view? So these are all these kind of contextual questions, which is I kind of ask, what are we working with and where are we now? So that I know that if I'm just being popped in, am I popping in the beginning, the middle, the end, somewhere in between? The more context, usually, not always, but usually the better. So you might think part of context is who is this for, but I've separated this out on purpose because I always ask myself, like, who is the audience? So like when I'm teaching, for example, in a class, my audience is pretty straightforward. They're my students. So when I come up with a design problem or I come up with a presentation or something, I know always who they are, what their level of information is, what the goals are for the class, and then everything's structured around that. So for example, the audience, if depending on if it's internal, then it's like it might just be selling the design team. It might just be your managers, your audience. Hey, give us a couple of options for this plaza. Okay, or give us a proposal for how you might handle visualization for this master plan. It might just be that I've got to sell just internally the team. Or it might be that we're working with the Viz team. All the information that I use basically gets handed off. It's so that it informs their final product. So these are all questions. It's like, well, where is this going and who's going to be looking at it? It's really important because they're going to be asking themselves question. Why am I looking at this? Why is this important? Why should I care? What are we trying to say? Usually what we're trying to do with our deliverables is we're trying to sell a concept. We're trying to get people excited about something. We're trying to get them to understand something. Like, for example, this plaza is here because, or this plaza has these programmatic activities because. And that's something that they can start to then see themselves in as a part of, and then hopefully support. Again, every project is going to be a little bit different, but knowing who your audience is super important, because you can tailor the amount of information to not only where they are, if they're laymen, if they're designers, or if they're laymen, but also to what it is that they want. What are they concerned about? What do they get excited about? So your audience is super, super, super important. So I'll leave it there. I've got more to say, but I'll just pause there and move on to the next question I ask myself, or I ask whoever's asking me to do this, to work with them, is going to be the format. So, for example, I know that most of the time we're talking digital presentation. So if I don't hear anything, or no one knows, or we're not sure, I'll probably play it safe and go, let's make sure this reads 11 by 17 landscape orientation. And the reason why is because that reads well on a screen. It works for 1920 by 1080. And it also can be printed. It can be printed 8.5 by 11, or it can be printed 11 by 17. So for the most part, if I don't know, I'm going to default to a landscape orientation 11 by 17. But the format's important, because the question I usually ask myself is this being presented? For example, is someone speaking to this? Is this one drawing that fits into a larger presentation? And if so, where in that presentation does that go? And is someone speaking to it? If they're not speaking to it, then it means that it has to speak for itself. So sometimes in this case, I might say, well, a rendering alone might not speak for itself. We may have to take a step back and create something like a design rationale that sort of explains the big moves. And then by the time they get to the rendering, they're like, oh, all this does is confirm the setup. It's the payoff for the setup for what you've shown me earlier. And if a lot of times we speak to those things. We can stand up with a big image on the slide. We don't have to have all the text on the slide if we're going to just be saying it. But again, I ask those questions. I don't know. I don't always get the answer, but if I do, that's going to go into my considerations. The next thing I like to think about, this is probably the first thing. This might be the first and only thing most people ask, which is the budget. How much money is available? But when I say budget, it's not just money, it's time too. Because you might be like, for example, we might have $10,000 for this task. That's plenty of money, but you only have 2 days to do it. There's no way I can bill that many hours in that amount of time. You might if you're a sole proprietor, you might bill more. You don't just bill hourly because you're like, whoa, you want it in 2 days. I got to clear my schedule. You're a priority client, then you get a priority fee. But even then still, it's like you're looking at two types of budget, which is how much time is available for the task and how much fee. Now, often they're the same thing. For example, if you're working for a company, what they're going to do is they're going to say, well, we've put in 40 hours. We have 40 hours available. But remember, 40 hours is different to, for example, my billing rate would be higher as a senior designer than it would be for a junior designer. So they might be able to put 80 hours into the same task that I might be able to put 40 or less, 24 hours. So the goal, of course, is that if I'm involved in a project, then I'm going to be billing less time because I'm more expensive. So in theory, that's okay, though, because I'm also way more efficient. So it really just depends on where we are, how much that budget is okay to be spread over a longer period of time with a junior staff versus how much you're like, no, we only have to get this right the first time. There's no room for hand-holding. That's why we brought you in. We've got to get it right. Right out the door. So I'll always ask it. Now, we don't always get info. Sometimes they don't know. Sometimes they go to you and say, will you tell us how long it's going to take? You tell us how much you think it's going to cost. And that's okay, because then that's when what I'll do is go into the next part. Once I gathered all this information, all these inputs, problem, context, audience, format, and budget, the next thing I would do is then think about what I want to do for this project, what I'm capable of adding to this project. So that's sort of this next part of the circle. The first half is basically the inputs. What do I need to understand to even begin this project or even say yes to it? Versus what is it that I offer? What is it that I'm going to be doing for this effort? So the first thing I always ask myself, and I don't have to do this, and I don't think everyone does this, but I always ask, what's the right thing to do? Meaning that if there was no time limits, there was no budget limits, there was no software limits, there was even no knowledge limits, I try to start with, what do I think is the right thing to do? So I go back to the problem and the audience. What is it that we're trying to say, and who is it that we're saying it to? And oftentimes what I'll do is I try to ask myself this so that I don't get stuck doing the same thing over and over again all the time, which is like, oh, we did this for them and that worked, they liked it, great. Oh, well, we only have so many hours, so we only have time for this, so let's just do this. I try to let myself for a moment say, what would I do in a perfect world in order for this to be the best that it can be? Now, I can't always do what the answer is to that, but I like to start there because sometimes I will sit there and that will tell me, no, we need to push back. We need to ask for more time. No, we don't need a 3 ground level views. We need one aerial because that's the right thing to do for this particular project. So I have no problem going back and then saying, okay, I've got all the information you gave me. Let me think about it. And then I'll go back and say, here's what I think we should do instead. Oftentimes, again, sometimes it's not worth it. You just say, okay, this is simple. This is easy. I'll just do it. Other times you say, no, it's not the right thing to do. Let's have a discussion and see how we can make this better. The next consideration I take into, which is a little bit part of, is maybe predetermined. They may already come into it and say, hey, Eric, we chose you because you have a particular style. We want that style. Client likes that style. Sometimes they don't. Half the time, most of the time, they don't. They just say, I want a rendering. They don't tell you how they want it to look. And that's great. Because then the question is, what am I bringing to it? Well, I'm bringing my style. But within that, I have usually 2 choices. And we're going hand-drawn, or are we going photorealistic? Or if it's internal, are we just leaving it as a SketchUp model? For example, there's no style. We're just building raw content, and we're feeding that in as a placeholder, and somebody else is going to style it. Maybe a graphic designer on the proposal or the marketing team. Maybe the model goes to the Viz team. Maybe it's a hand drawing that just goes to a junior staff, and they're going to go into InDesign. They're going to build a bunch of bubble diagrams. So stylistically, I have to think about, you might think of that as level of effort, but I'm thinking that more like, why am I involved in this? I bring a particular look and feel to my projects. You can think of that as quality, or you can think about it as the tools that I use, but ultimately I make a stylistic choice as to what's the most appropriate for this particular part of the process or in the process that we're in. So I like to include here this idea, and maybe this comes in, maybe this is a follow-up of what's the right thing to do for the project, or maybe this is a follow-up for how much time do I have? Because I like to think that, well, maybe there's an opportunity to try something a little bit different. We could play it safe and do what's known, or we can experiment a little bit and say, hey, I don't know how this is going to come out, but this is the kind of project that warrants some experimentation. This is the kind of project that says, hey, I need that technical overlay that I don't have currently. Maybe I'm going to use this project or this deliverable as an excuse to try a new extension that I've never tried before. And here I go. I've always wanted to use this extension. This is a great project. Let's push for that. Let's bring that in. Let's try it. Of course, there's a risk there. If you're going to experiment and you're going to do it in real time, meaning you're not doing it on your own time, you're doing it on project time, on project dollars, there's a little bit of a risk there. You want to feel comfortable that it's going to pay off. You just got to trust your gut and think, or at the very least, I'm going to budget a little bit of experimentation time, create a proof of concept, and then say, see, I think this will work. Now let's move forward. So we don't eat up all the time and then we lose because we took too big of a risk. And I guess, I don't know if this is the first question you should ask or the last. I put it last because the reality is if I get excited about a project and I know that I'm the right person for it, I believe in the mission and the audience, or it's coming from, again, someone that I trust, someone that I really want to see succeed, or a project I want to see succeed, then that availability question comes in, which is all these other things answered. Okay, we've got 1 week to do it. It's 3 aerials. It's going to be hand drawn. There's no SketchUp model. So I need to build a base SketchUp model before I can do the hand drawing. Once I've answered all those questions, the big thing is do I have the capacity? So can I actually do it? Because I want to say that I can always do it. But the question is whether I'm going to do it within my normal business hours or whether you're going to leak into say, oh, okay, this is going to be one I'm going to have to burn the candle at both ends. This is going to be the one that I've actually got 3 other projects. I don't have time for this. Maybe I wake up set the alarm for 4 o'clock in the morning, and I put a couple hours each morning before you start your proper day. So for me, this availability, once I've answered everything else, I can come back and say, do I have the capacity to give this particular deliverable justice? Because if the answer is no, the last thing you want to do is say yes to a project and deliver a subpar deliverable, a subpar product. I would prefer always, I'm sure you've heard this before, but what you do is you underpromise and over-deliver. Now, you can't do that maybe 100% of the time, but if you think more often than not, you underpromise and over-deliver. You say, yep, I can do that. And then if you have to go the extra mile and purchase an extension out of pocket and hope that you can expense it, or hope that it'll just get absorbed. If you're a sole proprietor, it'll just get absorbed. These are all these things that you do: time, software, tools, style, capacity. Am I going to go put myself into the red? I'll end up having, that's a question that only if you're doing this at home, only you can answer. So I want to kind of wrap it up by saying that I don't go through this process formally. I kind of outlined this process just for this video because I was thinking the other day, I was going for a run, and I was thinking, like, how do I know what is the right deliverable? If you've been doing it for a long time, you just know. All this stuff happens subconsciously. It happens almost like just inside your brain. But that's because I've been doing it for a long time. And so I was asking myself, well, what I do is this little circle here that you see next to me, I just see that in my mind is each of these, I think of them as like variables. Like, what are the variables that we're working with? And which priority do some of the variables have? For example, context, it may have no context, but the audience is super important. But the budget, we've got lots of time, but no money. Like, each one of these variables kind of shrinks and contracts. So I can see them in my mind. Some of them aren't there because they just don't exist. And that's why I'm there. I'm there to fill those gaps and answer those questions that I don't have going into it. So I thought this was kind of an interesting process for me to sit and try and put into words or visuals how exactly it is that I approach a particular deliverable. It sounds easy. Hey, Eric, give us a sketch rendering for this plaza. It sounds simple on paper, but the reality is that there's a lot that goes into it before you even pick up the SketchUp model and before you even pick up the pencil and start drawing. All of this stuff, the more you know going into it, I think the better, not only the more efficient the process will be, but the better the end product. So I'm going to leave you there for today. I'm going to say thanks, as always, for tuning in, supporting this channel, supporting me. And if you haven't already, and if you learned something, even if you didn't learn anything, you can still subscribe. But I'd like to think that you learned something today. And if you did, go ahead and give that subscribe, that like button. It just helps with the algorithmics, voodoo, magic that happens in the background. So thanks again for watching, everybody. I'll see you guys soon. Bye.